So welcome everybody to this first seminar in a series of workshops to explore the potential of markets in the water environment through water metrics and standards. There won't be any kind of clear answers today because this work is relatively new in Scotland, and we're kicking off the discussions today, really. It's been a group effort, so I'd like to welcome you here. I'm Anna Griffin from SEPA, but it's been a group effort across some key partners in Scotland that's brought us together today to welcome you to discuss this topic. I was going to say that we're going to lead with an overview of Derek Irvin's report that was pulled together in July, published in July. Sadly, Derek can't be with us today, so we are going to listen to a recording of a presentation that Derek put together at the weekend. This will sort of showcase his review and his recommendations. From that, we're going to hear an update on the progress that forest research has been making on the Woodland Water Code for the UK, and Rosie Brooke is here to discuss that with us. And then we're going to have two investor perspectives. Now, this market is kind of new and developing, but we're lucky to have Nalika Rajapaksha from United Utilities and Mark Williams from Scottish Water to go through from their perspective how they can value the water environment particularly. Then we're going to lead it with some breakout sessions, and like I said at the start, we've been thrilled by the numbers who wanted to attend, and the agenda is busy. So we're going to have quite a quick breakout session where you can sort of flag your projects, your ideas, opportunities, blockers with a facilitator. And then we'll come back and say goodbye. There's a series of events in this programme. The next one is on the 6th of December, and it's been hosted by Fishery Management Scotland, Sean Robertson, and I'll put the details for that event in the chat. Like I said before, there might not be any answers to the questions that you have, but we would like to have an idea of your questions, so you can put them in the chat. We may have time to open up to have some questions of the speakers. We can't ask Derek because he's not here. We're also going to be collecting all your views and ideas on a Miro, and that will be a data source that we can then look at going forward. And that will be open for a week after this meeting so that you've got time to go and reflect on it. So we'll go through the Miro a bit later as well. Julia, have I mentioned everything I said I was going to mention? I think so. We're recording. That was the main one. So is there anything else?
I'm just going to mention, did you mention Sean's?
I did. We'll put the link for that in the chat. And so we'll head up with Derek's presentation and listen to what Derek's been busy doing over the last 6 months.
So background. This was phase one of a much longer term and wider study initiated by the Water Metrics Working Group, looking at metrics and standards for water outcomes based on nature-based solutions. So take a little bit of time out of today's session to talk through a report that I published earlier this autumn as a result of some work that was being done by a wider working group convened initially by SEPA and Nature Scot, but based on some much longer term discussions about water metrics and standards. Hope to use this session to introduce a little bit of the background to what was done, to talk about some of the observations that emerged during the process, and to highlight the recommendations that were made in the report. There's a link at the end of the presentation to the report and to a short survey which will allow you to feed back to us on your thoughts on the priorities moving forward. So background. This was phase one of a much longer term and wider study initiated by the Water Metrics Working Group, looking at metrics and standards for water outcomes based on nature-based solutions. So we're looking for a set of metrics which will recognise and value the multifunctional benefits of nature-based solutions and changes to land management, that would encourage and support private green finance investment, either in its isolation or more likely through its role as part of a hybrid finance approach. And alongside that, to allow public finance to be more effectively and efficiently targeted. So getting a situation where if private investment will pay for certain aspects, that the public sector investment is aligned to ensure that it pays for the gaps and enhances and increases the benefits. The piece of work I did was a scoping study, and it was focused on existing projects and initiatives which were seeking to deliver water outcomes through nature-based solutions, looking at their experience of measuring impacts of those nature-based solutions, but also monetising those impacts to try to generate funding, investment, and a market for buyers to buy services linked to nature-based solutions. It was agreed at the beginning that any metrics that were discovered or which have to be developed, and I suspect we'll end up with a combination of both, had to be measurable, scientifically robust, and therefore credible. That they had to be usable in a range of real-world field settings across different sectors. So they can't be reliant on the fact that the driver is an environmental organisation. They can't be reliant on high levels of research input to support monitoring and assessment. They have to be usable. Alongside that, they have to be replicable. They need to stand up to use in different contexts and in different sets of catchment situations. And they have to be scalable. They have to be usable for specific projects, but across whole portfolios as well. And they have to be meaningful to all the key stakeholders. They have to give confidence to people who are willing to invest or fund work. They have to give confidence to people who are buying services, and they have to give confidence to the regulators who oversee either the schemes like the carbon codes or the actual regulation of performance and environmental impact. The way we looked for this, we were looking for metrics and standards that related to key ecosystem services that relate to water. And primarily that falls into two categories. You have water quantity and flow, and that's about the two extremes. So it's flood risk management, but also drought mitigation, reducing the scale of the peaks and troughs in water quality, managing and influencing flow rates through systems. And alongside that, or as part of potentially the same activity, looking at water quality. And that might be, as is the case in many parts of the UK already, looking at nutrient trading and nutrient load, but it's also about sediment. It's about pollution of other types than nutrients. And it's also increasingly about looking at the impacts on water temperature in a climate which is warming. As we moved into this, and as I discussed this with projects from across the UK, there were a few challenges and issues identified very early, and we worked them through the working group to see how we want to take these things forward. A key one is that water catchments are incredibly variable. You could almost say unique, and much of the work that's been done to look at, for example, natural flood management is incredibly catchment specific. So there's a tension between developing, recognising and agreeing generic metrics and standards that will apply across a suite of activity, across a portfolio of investment, across a fully accredited scheme, against that challenge of variability. And that leads to a set of challenges around practicability, because if we go to the degree of detail around catchment variability that may be needed for some audiences, we're almost looking at having a full-scale research project per programme of activity per catchment. And that throws out some real challenges about practicability. We can't be reliant on a research system which will cost us as much as the interventions. Or if we are, we have to at least be actively open about that and acknowledge it. And that leads, generally speaking, to pushing more towards modelling interventions and using models to forecast impacts. But it was also recognised that there are challenges and shortcomings of modelling as well, and that actually some of the assumptions that have to be built into models significantly undermine confidence in their predictions. So again, there are trade-offs to be made around this issue of measurement and modelling. There are also challenges in measuring and attributing impacts where an intervention is one part of land management across a river catchment, for example. So trying to capture relatively small changes and to attribute them back to the things that have been done in a specific set of projects is challenging. And finally, there's a lot of discussion around the difficulties relating to additionality and trade-offs. A situation where the existing carbon codes, for example, rely on bundling of many of the benefits we're interested in here around biodiversity, around water quality, into a single trade unit, which is predominantly based on carbon. There is definitely a desire and a recognition to stack benefits if that's at all possible, to understand that actually interventions which are designed to tackle carbon and biodiversity and water quality, for example, may be different to interventions that are primarily targeting carbon. The difficulties around that relate to the relative immaturity of the non-carbon markets. It's very hard to relinquish the non-carbon bits of a bundled benefit if there's a high degree of uncertainty about how those other benefits will be measured and lined up, particularly as you then move into questions of additionality and the risk that actually a single intervention may be being put forward to be paid for in multiple ways without any real proof that it's delivering the multiple benefits. And as part of that, going back to my point about a carbon-driven and a multifunctional solution, there are going to be trade-offs. So depending on which of the benefits we're prioritising in an intervention, there may be suboptimal levels of response against some of those other benefits, and understanding how we balance that is still an issue and still a challenge. We looked at water markets or water ecosystem markets and approaches that are happening across the UK. And looked at which ones at least were moving towards some form of maturity. And I'll come back to this later on in the presentation. But loosely speaking, the ones that are out there, which we've managed to find through talking to projects, there are a suite of market-related interventions around nutrient trading, primarily nitrogen and phosphorus, in certain parts of the United Kingdom. There has been a fair amount of work done looking, particularly tied up with peatland, but not exclusively, at water quality in terms of dissolved and total organic carbon and water colour, with knock-on effects for water treatment. Again, it's been done in certain parts of the country, not across the whole UK yet. There is an emerging market around natural flood management, but as I've mentioned already, it's one of the ones that is particularly prone to the challenges of looking at catchment specificity versus wider generic solutions. And then there's a suite of activity around water stewardship, around continuity of supply, but within a mindset that is about environmental quality and natural capital, not simply about building reservoirs within systems. This is particularly being driven by the industries that are reliant on both water and the environment, if you like, which you might argue is all industries, but certainly the ones that have pushed it forward most are likely to be in the food and drink sector, and in the Scottish context, particularly in the distilling sector, where there are some of the smaller scale and actually the global players looking very, very strongly at water stewardship and actually embedding water stewardship in the way that they operate. So I've mentioned in parts of the UK, and I've mentioned Scotland, and certainly it's a Scottish-based study, and there was some observations made around how things were working in Scotland in comparison to the rest of the UK. And I think it's fair to say that the main observation is that markets in Scotland are actually relatively mature, other than around carbon. We've not moved forward particularly on biodiversity metrics and biodiversity net gain at a policy level. Many of the water-related things around nutrients have been applied in parts of the south of England, particularly, which are particularly stressed by the challenges of nutrients. Many of the tools that have been used elsewhere have not been tested in the conditions that you would find in Scottish catchments. And to be fair, Scottish catchments are also very variable, so we'd need to be looking at them both in Highland and Lowland, West and East Coast, catchments that are prone to flooding, catchments that are prone to drought, catchments that are prone to both. Just while I'm talking about markets, I think it's perhaps worth pulling up this figure which comes from the report. It was very interesting talking through working with the projects on the ground, that many of them were very, very keen to make the distinction between the key players within the sorts of hybrid funding models they were operating. Partly, I think, because it was something that they'd had to learn on the fly. Partly because I think there was a feeling that very often when we're talking about this in a more strategic policy or abstract level, there's some confusion around the terminology that's being used. So speaking across the projects I spoke to, there's a distinction that's very, very clear. So first of all, we have funders of nature-based solutions. They may be philanthropic bodies, charity funders and others. They may be public sector. In fact, this is where most of the public sector grant aid stuff goes into. And ideally, in a successful hybrid model, you would be looking to funders to be funding the initial research, the mapping, the development of business cases, the front end before there is a clear economic and financial part to be played. So example there is the work that both UK and Scottish Government have done on investment readiness funding to pump prime the system. But also we'll find the opportunity for philanthropic funders to do this role as well. Moving on from that, you've then got the role of investors. And this is actually, you do see in papers and discussions a confusion between funders and investors, and between investors and buyers. So investors are the people who put in the upfront resource to develop nature-based solution product portfolios. They pay for the suite of things that are going to happen. They may be looking for very specific outputs and outcomes if they're impact investors. They may be simply interested in the scale of return. And you do get philanthropic investors who may actually be looking for their money back, but no return beyond that, the return being ploughed back into the system. But certainly we're looking at a situation there where it's not like a grant fund. This is something where there is a payment that will need to be repaid. Moving on from that, we get buyers. Buyers are the bodies that buy the service that is being delivered by the nature-based solution. There will be organisations who at times are investors and at times are buyers, and sometimes that's the challenge we face, is understanding that distinction. One of the things that came up very clearly from discussions is that buyers in this system are most likely to be the people interested in the detail of the projects on the ground. At an investor stage, it's whether the portfolio stacks up and makes sense. The buyers want to see what is being delivered in more detail because actually they're buying the detail. They're also heavily looking over their shoulder at what is acceptable to the regulators, because if they buy a service and the Environment Agency or SEPA or the drinking water regulator turn around and say, actually, we don't believe the outcome that you're claiming, it's actually not a valuable product from their perspective. And then there's a fourth group that was highlighted by several of the people I spoke to, which is there are people who benefit from the ecosystem service that's being delivered. They may not be buying it, they may not be paying for it in any other way, but their reaction, response and prioritization will influence what funders are willing to pay for, investors are willing to invest in, buyers are willing to buy. They may even set the priorities for funders, investors and buyers. So they have an influence through policy, legislation, feedback, and in the way that organisations set up their own strategic priorities. So a little diversion, but I thought it was worth flagging this up because it was quite an interesting piece of the learning as we move forward. So going back to observations from a Scottish perspective, I've mentioned the naivety of markets, or the immaturity of markets. Compared to particularly England, there are not as many regulatory and economic drivers in place, partly because we haven't had the major challenges across wide areas related to nutrient-based pollutions, I would argue, but also because, as I mentioned, the biodiversity net gain issues as well. So there's something there about some parts of the picture are missing. There's also evidence gaps, and I think it was flagged up by people who were doing work in this field and people who are on the edges trying to get there and perhaps a little reluctant, is there are still gaps. It relates to the point I made about stacking and additionality, for example. So there's something about better understanding what evidence we genuinely have, better understanding and sharing and applying it, and also filling the gaps that are still there. Whatever we do in Scotland, we need to set up a system which makes it easier for potential partners to engage. So for investors, that might be about developing clear project portfolios. For the buyers and the providers of the programs, it might be about better guidance on how to forecast benefits, measure impact, design solutions. But whatever we can do to make that process easier and more replicable and more robust is going to be helpful. Within the report, there are 7 overarching high-scale recommendations at different degrees of detail, and they are not sequential. They're not prioritized 1 to 7. They're not even timelined 1 to 7, to be absolutely frank. But this is where we got to in terms of the things that we felt the water metrics group, the working group, had to start to move things. So the first one was to say that we need some form of technical group that will help with those questions of making the market ready for people and accessible for people. That needs to be quite a wide-ranging suite of technical skills, and the group may change in its nature and may end up having to have subgroups if necessary to deal with the needs of investors versus the needs of project developers. But there's still a need somewhere. I would stress, though, that this doesn't need to be new, and it may be able to link it to the group that you'll hear about during this session today, looking at the Woodland Water Code, for example. Wherever we can, these recommendations should be about taking what we have and building on it, not replicating or creating from scratch, because I think that there's a real risk that we end up just duplicating efforts across the whole system. There's certainly a need, given the immaturity of the market in Scotland, to spend time with funders, investors and buyers getting to the point where we understand their market requirements. There's certainly a need to go back and look at the evidence base and the research that's out there around nature-based solutions and water outcomes, and to look at how much of it is directly applicable in a Scottish context, and whether actually we need to mirror some of the existing research to ensure that things work in the circumstances and situations we find ourselves in. As part of that, we need to be looking at the existing guidance and the tools and approaches being used to test them in the Scottish context, and when necessary to develop new guidance, new tools. And that might be simply or as simple as guidance around how you use the information that is available from others, how you get the information that's necessary from SEPA and use that in a way that helps you to develop and authenticate and validate what you're doing. We also need to support the development of market drivers. Now, recommendation 5 relates very strongly to recommendation 2. If we can tell what the market needs, we need to focus then on developing those drivers. And I say again, this is not about new work. This might be about making sure that water is well represented in work that's already happening, or it might be about using the work that's already happening to open up a discussion around water which isn't there yet. Excuse me. Crucially, across the piece, we need to develop Scottish demonstrators, which show the interaction between the key players in this, between the activity and the outcomes, that allow us to test what will be acceptable to the key stakeholders, including the regulators, and to get those moving and well documented as soon as possible. And I would argue that might mean that the focus of the working group moving forward, or the technical group once it's established, is actually to help existing projects to better monitor and understand what is happening, to extract the learning and share it. And finally, it was stressed across several of the interviews that I did with projects elsewhere that actually this system stands or falls on the way that the governance and delivery structures operate. So that it's about having at a catchment scale organisations who can aggregate the opportunities and beyond the catchment scale, a regional scale and potentially a national scale, that can aggregate the opportunities into portfolios of investment, that can allocate both the solutions and the income properly. They can monitor and pull together and share and steer and all these things are important. But those structures have to be meaningful. They have to be in the places that matter. They have to be able to influence what is changing. And that means that, again, it is not necessarily, excuse me a second, importance of water. It's actually about building on not recognizable and trusted structures wherever they exist. But we do need to look very carefully at what needs to be done nationally to get coherence and rigor and consistency, what can be done regionally to set catchment plus type activity in place, what needs to happen locally, and how local that needs to be representative and recognisable. I wanted to stress that the work that was done to underpin this report actually took place at the end of 2022. This is not a static field. Things are moving at speed in different parts of the UK in different ways, and therefore the report that you will see and access through the University of Stirling website, which the higher education chair site that I'm based at, is out of date and was out of date as I was writing it. This is a strength as well as a challenge, but I wanted to highlight two things. So there's a lot of work has happened across the last 12 to 18 months with the BSI, looking at nature investment, high consistency, highly valid and trustworthy investment systems for nature. It's worth flagging up that their response around water, and I checked it with them, and actually they spoke about this at a conference in Edinburgh recently too, they're pretty comfortable with nutrients. I would argue they shouldn't be in certain parts of the country, but that feels like a market. They're certainly comfortable with carbon. They're comfortable with biodiversity. Nutrients looks okay. Natural flood management, less so. Other types of pollution, not really there. And actually, from what I can tell, they haven't really got into the water stewardship side of things in any way either. So there are gaps that are similar to the ones that are picked up in the challenges and the recommendations here. So I think we can align with that. One of the really good things that we've got though is that thing about demonstrators and testing and having discussions with the key market players. We have a suite of very, very interesting projects have emerged in the first round of the Ferns investment, which is being coordinated by Nature Scott, coming from the Scottish Government. And there's some really great opportunities there to use projects. I'm particularly aware of some of the work that's happening in Fife because I've got an involvement with the Leaven programme in Fife. But the ones across the whole suite are of interest. So some of the questions we need to be asking may well be questions about water that we need to encourage these projects to be engaging with as they move forward. So I think we're in a really exciting place where we're sitting with a report that is acknowledged as being incomplete. And on that basis, what I'd like to ask is if you have time to go and access the report, to have a look at the recommendations, to tell us what you think the priorities are, and to tell us what you think we've missed or has emerged since we did this piece of work, because that will help us to get the next suite of activity right. You'll be starting this process today, but if you can go away and do it online as well, that'd be very, very helpful. The survey associated with the report is open for the next couple of weeks. So if that's possible to go and have a look at it fairly soon and give us your feedback, that would be really, really helpful. But on that basis, if I could thank you all for your time and hope that this presentation wasn't too stuttery, apart from the coughs in the middle. And thank you all and enjoy the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Derek. So lovely to see him on the screen, and a very interesting and well-paced presentation. I'm sure you'll all agree. There's some questions coming through in the chat. I'm going to move us straight on to Rosie Brooke, who is here with us today, so that we can hear what Rosie is going to explain to us about the Woodland Water Code that she's leading the development on. Over to you, Rosie.
Great, thanks, Anna. I hope everyone can hear me and see my slides. It's nice to see so many people.
Yep.
Great, thank you. Yeah, it's great to see so many people here today, and I'm really pleased to be able to give an overview to this project we're working on at Forest Research to develop a woodland water code. Hopefully, really just to pique your interest and to get some more conversations started. I'd also just like to shout out to the team. So on this project, there's myself, Rosie Brooke, as the Senior Project Manager. We have two co-leads of the project, Tom Nisbet and Gregory Valentin, and Romany Vassal is our environmental scientist, and Tom and Romany are also joining us today. So, okay, I think most people will be well aware of this, but just to kind of give a bit of an introduction of why we think we need to develop a woodland water code. Water issues in the UK, I think, are well documented and extensive. And there's been sort of growing evidence base showing that woodlands can provide a range of water benefits if we can get the right trees planted in the right place. And so then if we can kind of quantify and demonstrate that impact, we can promote woodland design and management that maximizes the benefits from woodland other than just, say, carbon or timber. We know we need more private finance in order to meet the UK woodland creation goals. And I've been doing some work, kind of comparing various scenarios of the income that you can get from sort of typical agricultural land use with the income that you could get if you converted to woodland, so money through public grants, timber, and also carbon. And you see, especially for sort of smaller projects, maybe 50 hectares or less, or where it's a more sort of broadleaf dominated scheme and you're getting less funding from the timber, there's a gap there and you're still getting more funding from agricultural land use. So we see a sort of gap there, which other credits, such as a water credit, could help fill that finance gap and provide that incentive to push people into woodland creation. And there's, of course, a range of incentives for investing in woodlands for water. We're all water users. Derek sort of outlined some of the drivers for this. For some organisations, it might be more around sort of avoided costs. So for water treatment companies, for water companies, avoided sort of treatment costs. For insurance companies, avoided sort of or lower risk in terms of flooding. And then for other organisations, maybe more from the aspect of their environmental, social, and governance or ESG policy. And also this move towards sort of nature reporting, nature impact reporting, rather than just climate impact, and also increasing resilience as the climate changes. But this is definitely one of those pieces that we really need to sort of understand better, to have more conversations, understand who wants to invest in water and why. And then also, as Derek mentioned, water markets in the UK are currently lacking. We've got nutrient trading in some parts of England, some emerging natural flood management markets. But really, for sort of carbon, there's some very well-established markets, the woodland and peatland carbon codes, also with sort of emerging biodiversity markets. And there's that kind of risk that water gets left behind and isn't really then considered in woodland creation. So, of course, the Woodland Water Code is habitat specific, but we really see it as sort of one part of the nature-based solutions for protecting and improving our water environment. So to give you an overview of the project, it's very much a development project to create a new code. So the output then is sort of all the methods and rules needed for the quantification of water benefits, how they could be verified, as well as the sort of market rules around buying and selling of credits. It's a DEFRA funded project, but we're very much looking to make it UK wide. And so the current project is running till March 2025. We basically have a plan to develop the code as far as possible by then and have a sort of draft code that can then go out for public consultation. We're considering these 3 different water benefits and taking them sort of sequentially. So we're starting off with the water quality, and we're kind of currently working on the methodology for that. And next year, we'll be focusing more on developing the natural flood management and water cooling methodologies. We'll also from summer in 2024, be looking to kind of pilot particularly the water quality methodology. So that could be woodland creation projects that already exist and kind of an ex-post assessment, or sort of planned projects. So if you're involved in any woodland creation projects and you think you might be interested in helping us to pilot the code, please do get in touch. And so the code will be targeted, so we'll be focusing on areas where water quality issues are the greatest, and also to sort of avoid disbenefit, so areas where there's water resource issues potentially. And so we'll have sort of different target maps for each of those different water benefits. So depending on the location and type of woodland creation project that you're proposing, will then impact which of these credits you could be eligible for. We're working very closely with the Woodland Carbon Code team. So following their approach for developing a new methodology, we submitted a sort of concept note to them, which was approved at the beginning of this year. And so now we're working on creating a sort of draft methodology, which will go back to the Woodland Carbon Code Executive Board once it's been approved by our steering and technical groups. So that's going to give you a really sort of useful framework to work to, and also, really helping us explore how carbon and water credits could be sort of combined and stacked. And so we're supported by a steering and a technical group. So we've got sort of representatives from regulators from England, Wales, Scotland, and Northern Ireland. And so from Scotland, SEPA's involved, Nature Scot, and James Hutton Institute. So just linking back to Derek's report and some of these recommendations, really to reiterate, we're very keen to work collaboratively. We really see this as kind of one part of the puzzle, and we quite nicely align with the various recommendations here. So, we've already got a technical group set up. Currently, that's focusing on water quality. It will sort of be adapted to then move on to natural flood management and water cooling in terms of woodlands water benefits. But potentially then it could sort of evolve into something else to maybe consider sort of other nature-based solutions. We're, of course, kind of exploring the market requirements for this and trying to tap into the other work that's going on in this area. And I guess our sort of number one priority is really solidifying that evidence base so that we can come up with a code that's robust, but not prohibitive. Like Derek was saying, something that's kind of standardized that can be applied across the UK and is accessible to everybody. And of course, developing sort of guidance and tools that will sit alongside that. So just to give you an idea of what we're sort of currently working on. So yeah, focusing firstly on the water quality aspect. We completed a review of sort of all the available models, and together with our steering and technical groups, have agreed that FarmScoper is the best available model. So that's a tool that's developed by ADAS, and we're basically working with them to do various modifications to make it suitable for the Woodland Water Code. So ensuring it sort of better represents woodland, that it really covers the whole of the UK. And also finding some additional work to see how we can incorporate the added benefit you get from woodland buffers on intercepting flow and then consequently improving water quality. And so in terms of water quality, we're considering 5 aspects. So nitrate, nitrogen, phosphorus, sediment, pesticides, and fecal indicator organisms will all be included. Also on the good practice measures, so we'll have a sort of standard set of good practice measures that are applied, really to avoid rewarding any bad practices. So if you're comparing sort of 2 farms where they're doing exactly the same thing, same woodland creation project proposed, if one of them is just applying more fertilizer than is necessary, they wouldn't be generating more credits than another farmer who isn't doing that. And then, yeah, working on developing the kind of methods and rules that sit alongside that. I won't go into these into too much detail. Potentially some of them might come up in the kind of barriers in the breakout groups later on. But I think it's fair to say, when we're thinking about this in terms of water, it's a lot more complex than carbon. We need to consider these for each of the different water benefits. They might apply slightly differently. And also the way in which, carbon sort of is cumulative over time, whereas that's not the case, say, for water quality, where you're getting sort of an annual reduction. And also in terms of leakage, we're not just talking about deforestation elsewhere, we're also having to consider any intensification or agricultural activities elsewhere. And in terms of permanence, we're very much sort of, we're going to be requiring a kind of permanent land use change to woodland. And this will work very much the same way as the Woodland Carbon Code, with a sort of a risk buffer of credits. And then additionality, which I think is always the big question, the big complex question that Derek, I think, summarizes quite nicely. But, really ensuring that we're incentivizing investment where it is needed. And this is going to become more complex as soon as we have sort of more than one type of credit that's sort of up for grabs. How do we ensure that all those credits are all sort of declared and tracked together? And I think, like Derek kind of highlighted, it seems like there's a desire to move to stacking credits, because kind of expected that could generate higher incomes compared to a bundled credit. There's a lot of issues that go alongside that, and so that's something we're trying to work through, and also aware of various other projects that are going on right now, such as the BSI standard. DEFRA has also just started a project looking at stacking credits. So yeah, really trying to tap into that kind of evolving space. And then just some market considerations. I think it's probably quite clear, we're not short of people that we're going to need to talk to for this project. There's a whole range of stakeholders that we need to engage with, and that's going to be a big focus for us next year. Thinking about sellers and landowners, it feels to me right now it's a very complex, busy marketplace. There's quite a lot on offer, and also quite a lot that seems to be in the pipeline that's coming. Farmers considering whether they want to sign up for the Woodland Carbon Code or biodiversity net gain, or if they're in areas nutrient trading perhaps. So really trying to make sure that what we're offering with the Woodland Water Code is something that's desirable to landowners, both in terms of maximizing sort of potential income, but also ensuring that it's in a kind of payment schedule that works for them. Also, how that might work with sort of more flexible public grant money, for example. So in England, like with the Woodland Creation offer, these sort of additional contributions that are related to water, potentially they could be replaced with sort of the funding from these water credits. And then in terms of the buyers and investors, and Derek quite, I think, nicely went through some of these and some of the things we need to consider, but ultimately that we can ensure through this code that we can generate high integrity credits that give people confidence in the market that the environmental benefit is really being delivered. And also exploring with different types of buyers, what exactly is it they want from a water credit? What do they plan to use that for? What's the metrics that's of interest? Is the sort of timeline and geography, how does that impact potentially their willingness to pay, or what kind of credit they might be interested in? And then lastly, just some next steps for us, I guess. So we're working on completing a first draft of this sort of water quality methodology, and also the methods and rules for the code. Looking to have a sort of first draft by the end of the year, and then that will go out for consultation with our technical and steering groups. Really trying to start this engagement with potential users of the code. We're working with Forestry Commission. They've just started some buyer research study, which will run till March. So sort of tapping into that. And then also as a follow-up to this session, we're planning to have some lunchtime seminars, dates to be confirmed soon, but that should be in sort of January, February, and potentially sort of splitting that into a sort of one focused on buyers and one focused on sellers and landowners. So yeah, it'd be really great to continue the conversation there, and hopefully we'll have some of that discussion today as well. And also just a final plug for pilot sites. So yeah, we'll be piloting the code sort of from summer next year once we've got the sort of methodology in place. But I'm already compiling a list of potential pilot sites, and we're really looking for a range of different types of projects across the UK. So if you are interested, please do just get in touch. And that's just our contact details. So I'll end there. Happy to answer any questions if Anna thinks there's time.
No, there is a little bit of time. I've managed to somehow delete all of the chat. I don't know how I've done that, but we have got about 4 minutes until I can welcome Nalika on to talk about United Distillers. If anyone's got a burning question for Rosie, I mean, the pilot call is really great, Rosie. I'm sure there's loads of people who want to put their hands up for that. Anyone wants to raise their hand to me, or we can go straight on in the programme. I'm not seeing anyone. Okay, that's great. Okay, could Rosie give us a bit more information about what being a pilot entails, Rosie?
Yeah, thanks, Kerry. I guess we're the pilots that we're thinking in terms of piloting the code. It really could be any kind of woodland creation project where one of these sort of water benefits would be applicable. So it's really just going to involve collecting information about your project and then running that through our sort of methodology to see how many credits could be generated. So, for example, if you've got a project of converting some agricultural land to woodland, running through the sort of water quality methodology to see, what are the reduced loads of pollutants and also sediment and pesticides to water. But equally, we're also interested in additional piloting in terms of if you've got actual monitoring data that we potentially could use to validate our methodology, that would also be of interest.
Okay, yep. And Rosie, somebody's put their head up and said in Warwick is a potential pilot area. And there's good examples in the D2. There's also some around about the Tave with the link to the Riverwood programme. And so I think Mark Williams in the chat had said we could probably do with getting a kind of list of demonstrators together. And I think that's a really good idea, and it's something that we could possibly pick out from the survey and through the Miro to today and onwards, is to have a list of demonstrators and for the different types of metrics that could be developed. So there's a collation job there that I think would be really useful. Okay. Yeah.
Anna,
David.
Henry's got a hand up. I don't know if you noticed.
No, I didn't. Sorry.
Yeah, go ahead, Henry.
Hello, good morning. Sorry, I've been a bit late to join this, and I suppose I may be asking a stupid question, but I'm just wondering about the sort of underpinning of this sort of approach in the water context, given that the outcomes are highly, in terms of ecosystem services, are also interconnected and are not just about the bit of woodland you do, but its position, the receiving environment, sensitivity of local sites. It's also connected. Now, I can see where a code works when you're doing sort of peatland, where your outcome of carbon sequestration is directly related to the activity, and the same with woodland, where carbon sequestration is directly related. But I suppose, given the complex relationships between any particular activity and its highly local specific nature, I'm really a bit confused as how you can create a sort of generic set of rules that indicate the value of an action in this context. I mean, my work, I've worked a lot in sort of water regulation and catchment management, all these sorts of areas, and I thought most of these things were done through modeling and understanding the system and trying to work out what actions might happen in that broader system context.
Yeah, thanks. Maybe Tom might want to come in on this as well. But I think whilst we're trying to create a sort of standard code that could be applied across the UK and it's quite accessible, there's still going to be a sort of process of projects having to create the sort of project design document, and somebody needs to kind of go through and check that this makes sense, that they are proposing a woodland in the right place that can deliver these benefits. Maybe Tom, I don't know if you want to expand.
Yeah, no, a very fair point, Henry. We do, though, in terms of our understanding of how woodland interacts with water, and we are initially, as Rosie mentioned, focusing on water quality and in particular on sources of diffuse pollution, and in our understanding of those sources, we think it's appropriate, and there are tools like FarmScoper that are available that will allow us to quantify the change in load to water, the change in the quantity of pollutant delivered to water through changing land use, as well as in addition to that, quite a lot of work done on looking at the effectiveness of woodland buffers in further intercepting and removing pollutants. So there are tools available, such as FarmScoper, that is been demonstrated to be robust in different settings, that we think we can extrapolate and apply to a range of settings, obviously linked to local soils and geology, geology and climate, to predict, to give us a reasonable robust prediction of the change in pollutant load to water through land use change. Yes, we'll always have to be mindful of local differences and factors, and there'll be a range of caveats to bring on board. But we think the system that we're aiming to use will allow that quantification as forming the basis of a water credit.
So will you also factor in, let's say, the volume of the receiving water body? Because presumably you put the same amount of pollutant into a water body that's a small stream, you get one result. You put the same amount into a water body that's a large river, you get a totally different result.
Yes, so it will be area based, so the benefit will ultimately apply to a hectare of land, representing that change in activity and associated pollutant loads and delivery to water. And so it will be built up on that local basis, depending on the hectareage involved. Yes, the eventual outcome at the catchment level will obviously depend ultimately on the scale of land use change in terms of the benefit. But at the local level, we're confident in terms of the unit contribution to that bigger picture from land use change on a given hectare of land.
But I was talking about the size of the water body, the receiving water body locally is clearly a major factor, isn't it?
Yes, so in terms of making a difference at the catchment level, that will be very much dependent, as you say, on the size of water body and thereby obviously the extent of the catchment. But it's about, as I'm sure you're aware, it's sort of building up an approach to various measures being implemented to deliver a much larger change at a catchment level at the end of the day. And in terms of building up that change, building up those contributions, then what we're focusing on through the Woodland Water Code is that woodland contribution. So we think we can demonstrate the contribution of that woodland benefit that can be added into the mix of other measures being implemented at catchment level, depending on the scale of the catchment, that collectively at some point in the future, adopting a more strategic approach will deliver that gain.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a really good point now to introduce Nalika from United Utilities, because our award-winning approach in the petrol has crossed the border is something that I think would really help this discussion. Can we tee Nali up? This is going to be Nalika Rajapaksha from United Utilities.
Can you go into slide mode? Yeah, thank you very much, all. Good morning. Yeah, I'm going to present today one of our successful nature-based solution case study, catchment nutrient balancing approach at the petrol catchment located in the Cumbria. If you go to the next slide, Julia, please. Yeah. Can you hear me properly?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yes.
okay, no problem. Yeah.
Go for it,
So
Sally.
yeah, a bit of a background to the petrol catchment. What were the challenges and opportunities in this catchment? It is a agricultural catchment, mainly livestock. UU has about 7 small wastewater treatment work across the catchment. The nutrient pollution is a key concern in this area, especially phosphorus coming from wastewater discharges and also significant amount from the agriculture. So we needed to take action to reduce the phosphorus load entering the river to achieve good ecological status. So 4 of United Utilities wastewater treatment work in the petrol catchment had WFD regulatory drivers in AM6 and 7 to reduce phosphorus level. So we did a baseline in the catchment and we understood that only from the wastewater treatment work, we would not resolve this problem. So we used our innovative catchment systems in thinking strategy and initiated catchment nutrient balancing approach in this catchment. Next slide, please. Yeah, what is CNB approach? Probably some of you have already heard this. This provides an opportunity for water companies to offset some or all of their obligation at wastewater treatment work by helping other sectors such as agriculture to deliver beyond their own obligation. It gives the partnership benefit and also opportunity to work with local communities. It is a sustainable way to improve river water quality through natural capital approach. So we started the first UK CNB flexible trial at our Calthwaite wastewater treatment work in AM6, targeting to remove total of 150 kilogram of phosphorus load through the integrated approach, 13 kilograms of this coming through farm intervention. We use hybrid approach in there, implementing catchment intervention on selected upstream farms as well as treatment work enhancement. As a result of catchment measures, we allowed to relax the wastewater treatment work permit. It allowed us to deliver innovative polynitrate reactive media at the treatment work instead of chemical dosing. Next slide, please. So here's the key step of catchment nutrient balancing approach. The first step is catchment modeling and monitoring. Here we use SIMCAT, SAGIS modeling tool, and identify the fair share reduction and then quantify the loads for offsetting. The second step is partnership approach and opportunity identification at the catchment. Here we identify delivery partners, farm and farm intervention, and then use the farm scope model to quantify the phosphorus reduction, then environment agency negotiation, and then intervention delivery and maintenance, and then ongoing catchment monitoring. Final step is annual compliance reporting. Next slide, please. Yeah. This 3-year CNB trial is completed very recently, and it demonstrated how successful this approach can be. Here's the in the table actual phosphorus results. You can see in the treatment work we target to reduce 137, but actual reduction average over 3 years 154. In the wider catchment, target was 13, and we have achieved 960. Total 150 target reduction, and we achieved over 1,000. So catchment reduction sustained for 3 years. This is not just one off. So we are not claiming that this massive load reduction is solely through our intervention, but act of collaboration encourage others to take action in the catchment and deliver greater benefit. And also you can see overperformance at the wastewater treatment work where we delivered the reactive media solution. this was only possible due to the relaxed permit limit due to this CNB approach. And also here you can see some additional benefit modeled through the farm scope modeling tool, the nitrate, sediment, nitrate oxide, and fecal indicator organism on top of the phosphorus saving. So, and here you can see an interesting picture of before the intervention delivery in the catchment and after intervention delivery, the erosion has been massively reduced. Can you go to the next slide, please, Julia? So in AM7, we have expanded catchment nutrient balancing trial into further 3 wastewater treatment work in the catchment. So target phosphorus reduction in this scheme is from 3 wastewater treatment work 468, and from the wider catchment 98, altogether 566. So we have delivered 68 farm intervention across 10 farms in this year and last year. No annual monitoring data is still available yet, but you can see again through the farm scope modeling tool, the additional benefit we can achieve through this scheme on top of phosphorus. As an example, sediment, you can see it's 25 times higher than the phosphorus. So yeah, so these kind of schemes deliver more benefit over and above phosphorus. So here are some example nature-based solution we delivered through this scheme: new hedges, riparian buffer strips, wetland, sort of things. Next slide, please. Yeah. So what are the benefits we delivered or aim to deliver in the petrol catchment through this CNB approach? Over 60% phosphorus reduction beyond the target, as you saw in the results, and estimated 20% cost saving. And also we additional 355K contribution through match funding, farmer contribution, and countryside stewardship. And also further 350K leverage funding in the catchment through Nestle. Additional ecological benefit, as I shown you in the previous slide: nitrate, sediment, nitrate oxide, and bacterial load, and also water quality improvement and flood reduction. Water quality improvement and flood reduction is less tangible and difficult to quantify, obviously. And here you can see ecosystem valued for this project. For the comparison purpose, I have put another nature-based solution delivered in the same catchment and ecosystem value of this. That is a wetland treatment in one of our wastewater treatment work. So if you see the petrol CNB solution, water quality benefit is 1.8, and climate regulation, biodiversity, and ecology benefit is each 17K, and recreational amenities 0, health 0, because the petrol project is farm intervention delivery, no visitor attraction. So those are being 0, but still it provided like 1.9 million total natural capital benefit. And then the Southwest wetland solution, again, water quality benefit 0.7 million, and less climate regulation and biodiversity benefit in there. But here you can see the different recreation, amenity, health value is high because this is a treatment work, wetland delivery. We have opened up that for the public. So that's why the recreation, amenity, health value gone high in here. So altogether, natural capital benefit of that project is 2.5 million. So these two nature-based solutions in this catchment delivered added natural capital benefit of 1.8 million over the standard gray solutions. Yeah, this petrol project obviously was awarded the Water Industry Forum Environmental Innovation Award last year. So next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah. So one of the key success of this trial is partnership approach. We have developed the partnership approach with the academia, NGOs, government organizations like councils, and also the communities and the regulators. And we work collaboratively to make this project successful. Next slide, please. Yeah, what are the barriers to take this approach further? This is a new approach, obviously. So regulators are still establishing the methodology. Hence, sometimes it can be hard to flex the regulation to support this way of working. And also issue of aligning time frame of different activities, grant schemes. Agricultural works are obviously seasonal. And also no developed market for nutrient or limited delivery partners. And also limited number of farm intervention that can be funded through water company investment. Farm Scoop listed more than 100 intervention, but water companies can only fund less than 20 out of that list. And huge unit cost per kilogram of phosphorus, it can be vary from 1,000 to 20,000, depending on type of intervention. It's a time-consuming process compared to the gray deliveries in the treatment work. Limited availability of modeling tools to quantify wider benefits, and also catchment monitoring can be costly and resource consuming. So yeah, if you are interested to know more detail about this project, please go to below link. There is a case study published, and also we have developed a catchment nutrient balancing example guidance for water industry as well, based on this study. Yeah, if you go to the last slide, Julia. Yeah, thank you very much, all. That's it from me. Hope you enjoyed it. Not too technical. Thank you.
Thank you, Alika. I lost my screen. There we are. One quick question. Stephanie has asked about the reactive media solution that's being used. Could you quickly answer that, Malika, or put it in the chat, and we can move on to Mark's Scottish Water perspective? If you could answer it in the chat. If you can access the chat, then everyone can see it, and I'll quickly introduce Mark Williams, who's here from Scottish Water. He is the Head of Sustainability and Climate Change. Mark, over to you.
Hi. So, Anna, thanks for this. So, I suppose I can give a strategic perspective from Scottish Water around where we're thinking here. What I could do is, if needed, I'll just share my screen just now. So, are you able to see my slides just there?
Yes, we can.
So basically, quite simply, what we're interested in is understanding, obviously as a water company, and you've heard some of that from the previous presenter, we rely heavily on the environment. So it's about understanding the stocks of natural capital and how the benefits flow through in terms of water supply and everything else. And the key thing for us about the choices we need to make is about understanding the baseline. Where are we today in terms of the challenges that we face? What's the cost to customers for doing this, and what's the values or benefits to customers? Because we can't do this unless we can show a benefit to customers around this going forward. So it's about if it's carbon, it's about the amount of carbon per unit of investment we're getting towards our net zero goals and expectations here. It's about water quality, benefits per hectare of land management, water holding capacity for flooding, and so on and so forth. And really about how we work through and start to kind of get these sorts of nature-based approaches systemized in our investment planning. And again, you come back to the compelling case as well. It's not just about today, it's about understanding longer-term resilience. It's not just about dealing with today's problems, it's being resilient to future risk around all of this. So really what we're looking at is a number of considerations, as I'm sure everybody is around the table. It's about the current land attributes and how it's used, the services provided. From our perspective, we're very much interested in the carbon status of our own land holdings, and then from that kind of identifying what we can do to improve it. So I mentioned kind of a lot of what we're doing is looking at our own landholdings. We own about 23,000 hectares of land across Scotland. So we're looking at how we use that to support our net zero journey, capturing carbon, as well as the reason for owning the land in the first place, which is the water quality and water supply that we have. So we want to take work around kind of baseline natural capital and biodiversity of these landholdings. And this will be going into our biodiversity report that's due at the end of the year, if anybody's interested on what we're finding there. But at the same time, what we need to do is to have a carbon inventory. So if we wish to use our land holdings to understand or to support net zero, we need to understand where we are gaining and where we are losing carbon, which is why we work with the James Hutton Institute to try and sort of establish that process for doing this. And it was mentioned earlier on, but effectively, that's led to us having or adopting key principles around carbon inventory on our land holdings. So it's not about creating market-based credits here. It's about adopting the same sorts of methods for assessing carbon and establishing the baseline and adopting some key principles around, I say, ensuring there's additionality and ensuring that we're not double counting or selling benefits elsewhere that we can't count ourselves. Around this sort of stuff. So this is all the sort of principles we've had to be putting in place to try and manage this. And through this, we do a lot around kind of investment in people and restoration. Some of that's ourselves, some is working with People in Action, and it's really geared towards investing to support water quality. We have a drinking water protection scheme that is investing working with farmers and making payments around fencing, cattle watering, nutrient budgeting, managing pesticides, as well as then, as say, any other kind of buffer strips or peatland on their land. We're doing woodland creation, so we've got schemes that are going to site now. So with about sort of 6 sites being delivered through this winter, so that's about 200 odd hectares of new native woodland being created at the minute. That's expressly for carbon benefits. So within that, we've been looking at the costs and benefits of carbon capture through that route compared to long-term options you might have for investing in things like process emissions reduction, where actually some of the technologies don't even exist for that yet. So we're looking at how we support our net zero goals and the costs for doing that within the programme. And also we're using the kind of the baseline work and work with people like Forestry and Land Scotland, who are our tenant on the Loch Katrine estate. So we're investing in the land management plan there that's effectively delivering things to basically at 4,500 hectares of new native woodland in that area. But we're also looking at the urban opportunities, again, the different technologies and the different nature-based solutions that can support land management. The key thing here is this has to be a multiple partner approach for working with local authorities, developers and others to look at how we use land, how we value land, and the multiple benefits we get from these different approaches in terms of not just flood storage and management of rainwater, but also the kind of the other benefits for greening the urban environment and so on. And as I say, the kind of land management plan at Katrine is probably the one that's most advanced at scale here. And that's led to a lot of work with obviously FLS as the key delivery partner there, but Scottish Forestry, the National Park, the estates around and about. And it's about kind of understanding how we work within here and our 10-year plan for investing in the new native woodland creation, peatland restoration, etc. within here that will deliver those multiple outcomes for nature, but also continue to provide resilience to water quality and water resources for Loch Katrine, which is the main source for Glasgow. And that's really just a kind of a whistle-stop tour, and I've put some links in the chat there which just kind of call these things out. But effectively what we're trying to do is to call out the key benefits, understand against our baselines so we can express those benefits in decision making for making these investment choices. So so that's kind of where we are on it at the minute. I'm happy to take any questions if need.
Thank you, Mark. Thanks so much. Yes, happy to put questions to Mark or Nalika, actually, as the two sort of examples that we've presented today. There's more out there, as we know, and everyone's doing little bits. What we're trying to do is have a kind of more group discussion and awareness around this. Any questions? Let me have a look at the chat. Here we go. I can't see any hands up because of the way I'm viewing Teams. So if you've got your hand up, just unmute yourself and ask.
It's Henry Lusengore again. I just wanted
Henry,
to follow
yeah.
up with Nalika. I was just wondering, just thinking about the detail of how this catchment nutrient balance system works. Presumably there must be monitoring points in the catchment where phosphorus, etc., is monitored. And presumably, I just wondered if in this system, all actions, wherever they happen in the catchment, are equal in terms of changing the outcomes, the measurements at the monitoring sites. I mean, I'm not a natural scientist, but I was wondering, because I suppose a catchment balance suggests that there's just an input output and all are equal. Is that actually true? Does that actually how it works in terms of the real monitoring of these systems?
Yeah, you can see that the actual results. Initial modeling shows we can like save 13 kilograms in the catchment, but actually when we monitor it, it saves like more than 1,000 kilograms. But we have monitored treatment work and the major water body as well as farm trend points as well. Within the farm trend point, we couldn't show the reduction, but in the treatment work, final effluent and the wider catchment compliance point, we could show the reduction, but still we establishing the better monitoring regime in the catchment. Sometimes you deliver like 2-3 intervention in the farm, although you monitor it, you can't notice. But in the wider catchment, obviously, it is visible. So still we developing what is the most effective monitoring regime. This is still under learning point.
Because I understand in catchments there's a lot of noise, isn't there? I mean, there's lots of things going on, so picking up a particular effect, unless it is really large, is very difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, it is true. This trial proved that, because we had 2 farm trend point, we couldn't prove anything. It was vary within each year, sometimes high spikes, sometimes go low, but there is no clear tendency in the farm points. But it was clear in the wastewater treatment work and the compliance point in the downstream of the catchment, the river.
Interesting, Alika. There's one question here for you, Mark, in the chat. I keep losing my chat and then have to scroll all the way down.
Mark, sorry, that's going to keep sticking loads of text in there.
I know. Mark, you mentioned, from Adrian, you mentioned Scottish Water's looking to build this into investment decision processes. Are you intending to develop value frameworks using multi-capitals as has been done elsewhere?
Yeah. So basically, SIDM for the uninitiated, sustainable investment decision-making process Scottish Water is working through, which is effectively looking at how we build in all these resilience into the long-term investment plan process. So the answer is yes, and it's been done through the kind of the benefits framework approach that's being developed with our regulators and stakeholders around all of this. So it's not strictly a 6 capitals or a multi-cap, calling it those key elements such as carbon and so on, where we can actually put more tangibles in and around it.
Okay, and also Mark, for you, who do project developers engage with in Scottish Water to discuss project deliverables? Is it yourself?
I think it depends what projects you're talking about there. So if we're looking at kind of, for example, the urban environment and urban drainage, then it's very much through local authorities and kind of land developers for looking at those opportunities around how we would actually integrate and develop a collective solution there. Externals in terms of farmers and others can approach us through the links I put higher up in the chat around the STEM land agricultural stuff for water quality. If there's other things in terms of our landholders, then we do get approached by other landowners and things and others that are adjacent to our land for opportunity depends what type of investment you're thinking of here.
Okay. Right. Are we ready, Julia, to move people into breakout groups so that we can do a bit of networking, think about why we're here, look at projects, opportunities, blockers, that